session from the previous one that David already did. So David is very generous with his time and with the young people at the association. And so we thank him very much for this. And I think without further ado, we know why we're here. So David, thank you very much.
Thank you for putting this together. I think the association is doing a great service to all of the candidates. Welcome to this webinar. First of all, congratulations to all the candidates. You've sent out your packages. Now the horrible part of the market is done, and now the fun is about to begin. And that's what I'm going to tell you about today as well. That's the interviews and flyouts. And let's start first with the interviews, because that's what's going to come next. If you're interviewing on the European market, that will be mostly between December 12 and 14, so not that far away. For you to get an understanding of what these interviews look like in terms of structure, so this year we will have virtual interviews. As you all know, future years are unclear. I am a big fan of online interviews, so I hope that we will continue to stay online, but who knows, we'll see. And a typical interview lasts about 30 minutes, and sometimes the interview starts by the host institution, like the committee that interviews you, by pitching their institutions or the jobs that they're advertising. But that doesn't have to be the case. It can also be that directly they ask you to start with your job market spiel, which will then be interrupted by questions through the committee. And then after you talked with them about your job market paper for quite some bit, they may also be asking about teaching, about some of your other papers, or some other job-related stuff. And finally, at the end, you will usually get the chance to ask one or two quick questions yourself. What I can stress in importance is that even for virtual interviews, please dress as you would for in-person interviews, that is business professional, and also from the waist down, because you never know what circumstances may force you to get up from your seat. So dress professionally all the way. Before the interview comes the scheduling of the interview. And I think it's important that if you have any say, like usually these, the institutions will offer you interview slots. If you can pick, then please make sure that you do not schedule interviews with your preferred employers for the very first day, because you will get better with practice. After 2 or 3, 4 interviews, you're going to be much better than at the outset. Also, that within the day, please schedule your interviews early in the day of the people interviewing you, because they will be much more fresh and attentive if it's early in their day, and then they are more likely to memorize and remember what you did. A few days before the interview, if the committee doesn't tell you all by themselves, you should ask them who will be present. Then you can Google these people, can see what kind of research they are working on, or if you can relate to them in any other way. And you can write that down on cheat sheets that during virtual interviews you can conveniently stick next to your screen, so that during the interview you can relate to them by saying things like, oh yeah, you know, your research in this area is pretty much related to what I'm doing in my job market paper, if applicable. You should also, before the interview, acquire some basic information about the department, the school, the city, if applicable, the country, to make sure that during the interview, once you get your turn to ask questions, that you don't ask questions that you could have easily Googled. And also, if you have Googled some information and you drop that while asking a question, then it signals that you have some interest in the place, which can never hurt. And what you should expect is that some people, but definitely not all people, may have read your job market paper. I've seen everything from people not having read your paper at all, to people just having read the introduction, to people really having read the entire paper. So to give you some ideas how we do it at Tilburg, we assign interviewers to candidates, and we have primary and secondary interviewers, and the primary interviewer is tasked to have read the whole paper and prepare questions based on that, whereas the secondary interviewer will only have a superficial look and ask some supplementary questions. Now your job market spiel. This is the most important part of the interview. So in order to perform well, you should prepare and then memorize a really polished summary of your job market paper. You should have enough to say for about 30 minutes, but in most cases, you will not need that. During the presentation of your spiel, you will be asked lots of questions, and ideally many you can answer by just jumping to different parts of your spiel because they will bring up common concerns. The purpose of the spiel is that you bring across how cool your job market paper is, and the committee will try to find out how, in quotes, smart you are. So like, how good are you at answering questions that the committee hopes you've never heard before? How good are you at intellectually engaging with the questions? Really make sure that you've memorized your spiel perfectly and that you practice it often enough that it doesn't sound rehearsed. And use everyone you can in order to practice, peers, professors. If your department sets something up, job markets practice interviews, mock interviews, do those as well. Friends, spouses, family, whoever you can find. With online interviews, you may not need to memorize, and there's a big if here. If you can read it from, like, if you stick a piece of paper next to your screen and you read from it in a way that it sounds natural, then you don't need to memorize. But I think this is only true for very few people. So I would recommend for everybody to not do that and instead try to memorize it, because that's usually easier. If you decide to read it from a sheet of paper because you think you can do it in a natural way, then I recommend that you use some sort of teleprompter software to avoid that we, as the committee, see your eye movement while you read from the screen, because that's also quite distracting. What does the spiel look like? So essentially, you want to start with one sentence about the field you work in, and then briefly transition into motivating your setting, telling people about the methods you use, and then tell them what you find. And then it's really important to also tell people why it's important what you find. And this kind of like short summaries should be about 2 or 3 minutes. And many departments, not all, will let you finish the short summary before they start asking questions. After the short summary, you go into a more detailed descriptions of what you do and what you find, but then you should really expect to be interrupted for questions anytime. So what I recommend is that you design your job market spiel in chunks, which then allows you to, if there's a question coming up, to like pick out a certain chunk from later in the spiel to basically say what you want to say in answer to the question, and then jump back to the previous chunk you've been in. And that makes it much easier to respond to questions as they pop up. And remember, you won't have slides, you're just talking to people. So make sure that you have enough structure in your spiel that you're not losing the audience. So signposting is really important. Say things like, first, I do this. Second, I do this. And once you get questions, then really it's your time to shine. So prior to the interviews, make sure that you have rehearsed, convincing answers ready to the most obvious questions that have come up in mock interviews, that have come up at practice talks, so that you can really give spot-on answers to the questions you're getting. Quite likely you will hear a question that you have not heard before. If that's the case, then really try to fully engage with the question, and also don't be shy to ask for clarification of the sort. Do I understand you correctly that you are concerned about X? And then really deliver an answer that convinces the committee that you are really someone who can think, reflect, and find good answers to these types of questions. If you need a few seconds, and really it's just a few seconds to think, that's fine, do it. Fill the thinking time by saying, that's a great question that I hadn't thought about. Let me think for a second. I think your concern is ... It's also fine if you don't know the answer to a question, then just say it and promise to get back to the committee with an answer. And if you cannot perfectly alleviate a concern, then it's also fine if you tell the committee that you cannot fully alleviate it, but then you can say, yeah, I'm aware of the concern. I didn't have time to address it yet, or didn't have the possibilities to address it, but I plan to take the following steps next. So after you've talked about your job market paper, you will also be talking a bit about other papers, maybe. So make sure that for all the other papers that you have listed on your CV when you applied, you have rehearsed short spiels of 5 minutes each. They are really much more condensed and should only be really high-level summaries, because there will not be a lot of time left at the stage that you'll be answering. But of course, you may receive questions on the methods, so you should know what you're doing in those papers. Also, some places may be interested in having a short spiel on teaching. This doesn't pop up often, but especially on the European market, there are some institutions where teaching is really important. And for preparing such a spiel, I just recommend that you borrow from your teaching statement. That's easiest. At the end, you will be given the opportunity to ask questions, and I recommend that you should not ask more than 2 questions, also with an eye on the time. If you're already over time, then keep yourself really, really short to not make the committee hate you for going over time if it's actually them who asked you too many questions for too long. If you don't have any real questions, then it's fine to just ask, when can I expect to hear back? What's the timing of the process? That's also a fair question to say. Don't ask specificities of the contract like salary or teaching load. This is better something you can discuss during the flyout stage. And of course, don't ask any questions you could have easily Googled because you want to show interest in the position. You can ask questions because, as I told you earlier, you want to be prepared in the sense that you want to find out a few things about the department, the school, the country. So you can use this opportunity to ask questions to show that you came prepared by asking something along the lines of what I've given in this example. I saw that you have a center on innovation research, and I was wondering whether you would think I could meaningfully contribute to the work of the center, given my research interests. That shows you've at least taken the effort to Google what this center on innovation research is, but this is just one of many possible examples of how you can show interest. It's also really fine to say that you have no further questions at this stage, but then also combine that with a statement saying that, yeah, I really know a lot of the department already. You clarified this, you explained a lot during the interview just now, and I really like what you're doing, and I think that I would be an excellent fit, is also perfectly fine instead of asking a question. So after the interview, directly after the interview, I recommend that you write down all questions that you couldn't answer or where you think you were not satisfied with your response ex post, and that will happen. And also try to write down who asked which questions, because then I recommend that you would send a thank you email either directly after the interview if you have time, or then at the end of the day to each committee member. And ideally, such an email contains a really generic thank you for the interview, how much you like the department, the school, maybe reiterate additional reasons why the place would be a good fit. And this is then also the place to answer any unanswered questions or improve on the questions that people have asked. This is also a good situation to get back to the respective committee member and say, oh, I think this one question that you asked about XY was a really great question because it goes to the core of my people. In my experience, some candidates send thank you emails, but clearly not the majority. But in my experience, they do influence committee members. So I recommend everyone to do it. I think this will eventually mean that we're moving to an unhealthy equilibrium where everybody sends thank you emails, because at face value, they should not have any effect, but since they do, I think it's optimal for you on an individual level to send these emails. And that already concludes the interview part. Once you've mastered that, then there's the Christmas break, and then there's New Year's, and then in the new year, the flyouts will start, and I hope that all of you will get many of those. So what does a typical flyout look like? So if flyouts are going to be virtual, which nobody hopes they will, but then you would have a talk and then possibly also some bilateral meetings via Zoom, WebEx, MS Teams, or any similarly working platform. Even if you have an in-person flyout, it may be the case that some of the bilateral meetings are going to be remote, and the seminar attendance may also be partly virtual. And this can be quite awkward, and you need to prepare for that, because then sometimes somebody will, what seems like, yell at you over the speaker because the volume is not set perfectly, and so you shouldn't, you should be prepared that this may happen. If you have an in-person flyout, then you will also have quite often a dinner or a lunch, but this varies across countries. Don't be offended if you don't get one. There are, of course, always administrative restrictions on what a place can offer to candidates, and this may have nothing to do with how they value you. Some places will book the travel arrangements for you, others will reimburse you later. I think it's optimal to just go with whatever they're suggesting if you are not constrained financially. At some places, you will only meet faculty. At other, you will also meet graduate students or teaching staffs. Some places may not even have meetings at all. again, this may be partly culture. This may also be related to administrative reasons in the process, so don't be offended. A few places fly out several candidates on the same day. This can be, but doesn't have to be awkward. It really depends on the group of people. The disadvantage of that is, of course, that you have no choice over a slot. So in these cases, if they already tell you, oh, we just have one flyout day where all the candidates come in, then ask them directly when that will be so that you can block that day and not schedule any other flyouts on that day, because that is not going to be a date you can freely choose. If you can choose, however, which is the case with most interviews, whenever they don't fly out several candidates at once, is that you want to try to avoid scheduling your preferred places early, just for the simple reason that you're going to get better with practice. And some places, or I think how most places would do this, is that they will reach out and say, oh, we'd like to fly you out on February 10th. And of course, that may sound like they only have this one day available, but you can always ask and say, look, this date is not really working for me. Can I have a different date? And then most places will accommodate you. If not, then you just take the slot. If they do accommodate you, then you can pick a different slot. And once you have the slot agreed upon, then it's all about getting to the place. If it's in person, really make sure you plan enough time. You don't want to get late because of a delayed train, a delayed flight, a canceled flight. So make sure to plan sufficient time. If you fly, make sure that if you can, you have everything in a carry-on and not in checked luggage, because this can get lost. This risk is even higher if you have connecting flights. For suits, I would recommend using a garment bag that you take as carry-on so that the suit doesn't wrinkle. Make sure that before the flyout, if you can, that you get some rest and that you're prepared. And usually you would arrive the evening before, and you can use that time in the evening to already explore the area, to not get confused on the day itself. You want to be able to find the building that you need to go to. You don't want to get lost on some busy intersections. So make yourself familiar with the surroundings. In some places, it might happen, and this is something that I've witnessed usually that younger faculty members do, is that they might invite candidates to an additional informal dinner the evening before. These are quite often not mandatory, and it will be made clear in the email. And usually why places do this is they want to pitch the place and the attractiveness of the place to the candidate rather than testing the candidate for suitability to the position. In these cases, I would really ask for a dress code, because it may be that this is really also informal in the way faculty dress. It's a little tight to navigate these additional early dinners, and it's perfectly fine if you feel uncomfortable having it, that you say, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm arriving so late. And I need to prepare a few things. I prefer not to. That's also perfectly fine. At the day itself, it's time for your job market talk. What I've seen is everything between 20 minutes and 1.5 hours, most commonly 60 minutes. So make sure that you have versions of your presentation that can accommodate all of these features. Some places in some countries may also require you to give a short talk on teaching. There you should have something prepared if that comes up. And really, you should expect varying crowd sizes. In some departments, there's a secretive hiring committee of only very few people. Others have the whole department there, including grad students, some without grad students. So if you want to figure out if low attendance is an issue, then you should ask that during the bilateral meetings that you'll have after. Goes without saying, but I'm still saying it, make sure that the talk is really well rehearsed. You must have practiced it many, many times with peers and ideally with faculty. What I personally found optimal is really having the first few talking points on each slide perfectly memorized, and then just essentially hitting the play button and starting the talk. Really make sure that you stick to the time they give you. Never run over. Many faculty members have meetings scheduled directly after the seminar talk, and they may get super annoyed if you run over time. Try to be an entertaining person, but also serious. Respond courteously to all the questions you get, and really try to answer them to the best of your ability. Try to show that you're a serious researcher, but who's also an interesting person and who likes to engage intellectually with the questions. After the job market talk, and also before, often you will have many meetings in which people will mostly want to talk about your research and get to know you. I recommend that you show some interest and enthusiasm by also asking them about their research but don't push them if they only want to talk about your research. It's just, I think, a way of showing that you're also interested in what they are doing. Be a good active listener, have intellectual conversations that really show that you're a good academic. Sounds easy, I know it's daunting, but I'm sure you all do well. Use this also as a chance to ask questions about how life in this department in the respective city or in the respective country is, especially to other junior people and other internationals if this country is a foreign country for you as well. And smaller departments may struggle to fill your schedule. Don't take offense. They'll have many flyouts, and at some point they will not be able to just completely fill a schedule, and that should not be a reason for you to be offended. In the meetings, keep an eye on the clock. Make sure to not run over by more than a few minutes to not annoy the next person who's waiting for you. And then in between, if you need a break, tell people at the beginning of a bilateral meeting, say, could I quickly use the bathroom? And even if you just need a few seconds to breathe, also ask that, go into the bathroom, take a deep breath, and then continue fully energized. Here are some questions that you can ask during bilateral meetings that I found helpful. For example, how does the department support junior faculty? Are there mentoring programs? Are there specific sort of competitive grants? What are the class sizes that you will be teaching? What are the students like in terms of selection, nationality, skills? Will you be able to supervise grad students, or is that reserved to the senior faculty? What admin tasks do they expect you to do? Will you have money for research assistants, experiments, data purchases? Are there grants, competitive grants at the department, school, university, country level that you should be aware of? Ask people what they like about the place. And what I think is a really good question is that you also ask people what they dislike about the place. Because everybody will be very positive about the place. And then if you force them, quote unquote, soft force them to really think about something like the one thing that they dislike, then maybe that can also be quite helpful. Ask people where they live and what living standards are common for juniors so that you get an idea if you need to share an apartment with 3 other people or if you can afford buying your own house. And if it's in a foreign country, of course, ask the international young faculty what life is in that country, and especially if they have to teach at some point in any language other than English, and if the department support acquiring the local language. And I think one thing that is also really important is ask about the tenure process, because this can vary from country to country. Sometimes you have committees using a fixed point system. Sometimes you have committees reading papers. Sometimes there are clear guidelines, sometimes vague guidelines, sometimes there's nothing. Some places may even have automatic tenure. What do they look at? Is it research, teaching, citizenship? So just make sure that you have a good idea of what they want to see. During the day, quite often right before the seminar, many seminars are lunch seminars. You will have a lunch with some other faculty members. Really make sure to eat light. Having really heavy, meaty food is something that can really pull you down during the seminar itself. And from personal experience, I can say soup stains on a suit are not desirable. So if I were you, I would avoid soup. I think salad is often a good choice. Expect to have lots of research discussions during lunch, especially about your job market paper, because these lunches are often used by faculty members who didn't have time to take a bilateral meeting slot, so they'll meet you for lunch instead. And this is their opportunity to get to know you and especially your research. Again, lunches may range from really fancy creative cuisine in restaurants to just somebody handing you a sandwich. Don't take it personally. There may again be administrative constraints. During the lunches, be likable, and as during the bilateral meetings, be interested and excited about what people do. Don't make any off-color jokes. And then the last part of the day is the dinner. These conversations at dinner may or may not be more personal and aimed at getting to know you as a person, but there's also certainly going to be some research component that people talk about. Again, be likable and interested. Don't make off-color jokes. Don't engage in gossiping or telling secrets. Don't drink too much alcohol. Why? Well, see previous bullet point. And it may happen during dinner or during other parts of the day that you are asked about your outside option or your preferences. And you want to think carefully in advance of how you will answer these kind of questions, because revealing information may be something that you want or that you do not want. So think about a clever way of how you can answer these questions. If you want to be fully honest about it, or if you want to give avoiding answers, that's completely up to you, but it's important that you think about it ex ante. Dinner is then also time for you to ask any unanswered and more informal questions that you have, for example, about life in the country that you're in. After the flyout, of course, make sure to keep all your receipts so that you can get reimbursed. Some countries are more strict in terms of rules, like what kind of documents you need to provide, like boarding passes, and others are just okay with some simple receipts. Send follow-up to all the people, follow-up emails to all the people that you've met during the day. Thank them for the day. Even if you can and still remember, refer to some discussions you've had and say, oh, I found it very interesting when you told me about your paper doing blah, blah, blah. That really shows that you're very much engaged. Reflect on all the interactions you've had. If you had a bad feeling about something in the department, something seemed off, discuss with someone you trust, which is ideally your advisor. Quite often, you'll just have had an interaction that feels odd, but that says nothing about the place in general. So it's important to talk about people with this. Once you receive an offer that dominates the place you had a flyout with, immediately let them know so they can cross you out from their consideration sets. Many places are bound by the number of offers they can make to candidates, and they can only make a new offer once the previous offer is turned down. So it's the courteous thing to immediately let them know once they are no longer in the race. And generally, don't be shy to inform the hiring committee about all the developments that happen on your end. For example, if you get an offer from a place that you'd rather not attend compared to the place you've flown out with, then let this place know and say, look, I just received another offer. I would be very much interested in accepting an offer from you. What's the process? When can I expect to hear any updates? I would really be interested in these sort of things. And this is a short rundown of what you can expect in the next 3, 4, 5, 6, possibly longer weeks. All of these slides are uploaded on the Google site eCongret Advice, and there's more materials that I think you may possibly find helpful. And yeah, this webinar was recorded, so it will be online as well. So we'll have time to answer questions.